He sat there, his torso bare except for the blood-soaked bandages wrapped around his ribs, watching her frozen in the doorway. The overhead light flickered once, casting shadows across the wounds that mapped his chest like a battlefield. She was supposed to run. She was supposed to leave. But instead, her trembling fingers moved to the first button of her uniform, and the silence between them became so thick she could taste it. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken confessions. Then she stopped. Her hand fell away from the button, and she made a different choice entirely, one that would set fire to both their worlds and leave nothing but ash in its wake. Welcome to True Soul Stories, where the darkest secrets of this city come alive. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and the price of a single moment of mercy. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Seoul? New York? Somewhere in between? I want to know who's brave enough to hear this story. Now, let me take you back to that night. The night Patricia made the choice that would haunt her forever. Patricia had been invisible for 3 years. That was the point of being a maid in the compound where Seoul's elite gathered to make deals that never saw daylight. She cleaned rooms where men discussed territories like they were trading cards. She scrubbed bloodstains from expensive tile and pretended not to notice. The Korean families who ran the operations tolerated her because she was quiet, efficient, and most importantly, forgettable. Being a black woman in their world made her even more invisible. They looked through her like she was glass. That night, she was mopping the East Wing when Duck Hwan, one of the senior operatives, grabbed her arm so hard she dropped the bucket. Water spread across the polished floor. "Third room, end of the hall," he said, his accent thick with urgency. "Man in there needs cleaning up. Everyone else is busy." She wanted to ask why they were all so frantic, why the compound had been on lockdown since sunset, but Duck Hwan was already gone. She wrung out the mop, picked up her supplies, and walked toward the room. The door was already open. That's when she saw him. Yi-jun sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward slightly, his breathing shallow and deliberate. Someone had tried to patch him up, but whoever did it had clearly given up halfway through. Bandages hung loose around his ribs, soaked through with crimson. His skin was pale, almost gray, and sweat dripped down his temple despite the cool air conditioning. But his eyes were sharp, aware, and fixed directly on her. "They sent you," he said. It wasn't a question. Patricia stood in the doorway, her supplies clutched against her chest. "I'm here to clean. I don't need the room cleaned." His voice was low, strained, like every word cost him something. "I need you to stay." She should have left. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, walk out, and pretend she'd never seen him. But something in his voice, something raw and desperate, rooted her feet to the floor. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I know." He leaned back slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. "They think I'm dying. Maybe they're right. But I don't want to spend my last hours alone in this room staring at walls." Patricia's grip tightened on the cleaning supplies. "I can call someone. Your people. My people are the reason I'm bleeding." He cut her off, not with anger, but with exhaustion. "And the ones who aren't will be dead by morning if they stay close to me." Silence stretched between them. Then he said something that made her heart stop. "Lie beside me, just for a moment. I don't want to die like an animal in a cage." Her breath caught. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected to find. Humanity. Not a monster. Not a king. Just a man who was terrified of dying alone. Her fingers moved to the first button of her uniform. She didn't know why. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something else entirely. But as her thumb pressed against the button, preparing to slip it free, her hand started shaking. No, this wasn't mercy. This was survival instinct trying to dress itself up as compassion. If she did this, if she crossed that line, she would become something she'd spent her entire life refusing to be. Someone's possession, someone's pity story, someone's mistake. She dropped her hand. "If you live, you live," she said quietly, setting down her supplies and walking toward him with a clean towel. "If you die, I did my best." Yi-jun watched her approach, confusion flickering across his face. "You're not." "No." She knelt beside the bed and began unwrapping the ruined bandages. "But I can stop you from bleeding out before sunrise." For the next hour, Patricia worked in silence. She cleaned the wounds, applied pressure where needed, and rewrapped his torso with steady hands. He didn't speak, didn't question her, just watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she finished, she stood, gathered her supplies, and walked to the door. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She paused, but didn't turn around. Because you asked for something you thought you couldn't have, and I decided you were worth more than what you were asking for. Then she left. Morning came with chaos. Patricia was scrubbing the kitchen when she heard the shouting. Doctors rushed past her, their faces tight with disbelief. She caught fragments of conversation. Impossible. How did he? Someone check again. This doesn't make sense. Yi Jun was alive. More than alive. He was awake, coherent, and according to the frantic whispers spreading through the compound, asking questions. Specifically, he was asking about her. Patricia felt her stomach drop. She kept her head down, worked faster, hoped that if she stayed invisible enough, this would blow over. But Seoul's underworld didn't work that way, and she knew it. 2 days later, Dukwon found her in the laundry room. He wants to see you. I'm busy. I didn't ask if you were busy. Dukwon's tone left no room for argument. 5th floor. Now, the walk to the 5th floor felt like climbing toward execution. When she entered the room, Yi Jun was standing by the window, fully dressed, looking nothing like the dying man she'd left behind. The bandages were gone. His posture was straight. He looked like exactly what he was, someone who commanded fear. You didn't have to do what you did, he said without turning around. I know. Most people wouldn't have. I'm not most people. He turned then, and the intensity in his gaze made her want to step back. No, you're not. Silence. I want to thank you, he continued. You don't need to. I want to know you. You don't. Why? Patricia met his eyes and spoke with a clarity that surprised even herself. Because I already belong to someone, and I'm going home to him. It was a lie wrapped in a truth. There was a man, back in Accra, who'd promised her marriage before she left for Seoul. They wrote letters, made plans. He was her exit strategy, her proof that this life was temporary. Yi Jun studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see. He didn't push, didn't argue, just accepted it. But something in his expression told her this wasn't over. Here's the thing about powerful men, they don't ask permission. They don't wait for invitations. And when they want something, they don't stop until they understand exactly why they can't have it. Over the next 3 weeks, Yi Jun didn't touch her, didn't corner her, didn't make demands. But he watched. And worse, he investigated. Patricia noticed small changes. Her work assignments became lighter. The other staff started treating her differently, with a deference that made her uncomfortable. CU, who coordinated the household, stopped giving her the worst tasks. She told herself it meant nothing. But at night, lying in her cramped quarters, she'd think about those dark eyes watching her from across rooms. She'd remember the way he'd looked at her in that moment before she left him to live or die. And something inside her chest would tighten in a way that felt dangerously close to anticipation. She wrote more letters to Kwame. Long ones. Desperate ones. Letters that tried to convince herself that what waited for her in Accra was real, solid, worth holding on to. He wrote back less frequently. She told herself that was normal. International mail was unreliable. He was busy with work. It didn't mean anything. Patricia found out later, much later, that Yi Jun had been tracking down every letter she'd sent to Accra. Found the man's name, his address, his job, his debts, his family, his drinking habits, his other women, everything. And then Yi Jun made a phone call. Listen, if you're still here, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now because this story is about to take a turn that'll make you question everything you think you know about love and manipulation. Trust me, you won't see this coming. The man's name was Kwame, and he arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday. Patricia was folding linens when CU, one of the compound's coordinators, told her she had a visitor. Her heart leaped. She hadn't expected him for another 6 months, hadn't even told him she'd saved enough for his ticket yet. But there he was, standing in the compound's courtyard, looking uncomfortable in clothes that were too formal for him. Kwame. She dropped the linens and ran toward him, hope flooding her chest for the first time in months. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Patricia, you look well. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air between them, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. How did you get here? I didn't send. Someone bought me a ticket, Kwame said, glancing around nervously. Offered me a job, too. Good money. I thought maybe you'd arranged it. Her blood turned cold. Who? Before Kwame could answer, Yi Jun appeared from the main building, walking with the casual confidence of someone who owned everything in sight. He looked at Patricia, then at Kwame, and something cruel flickered in his expression. I wanted to meet him, Yi Jun said simply. The man who holds your heart. Patricia's hands clenched into fists. You had no right. I had every right to understand what I'm competing against. He turned to Kwame. Tell her. Kwame shifted uncomfortably. Patricia, listen, I think there's been some confusion. Tell her. Yi Jun repeated, his voice dropping an octave. Kwame exhaled slowly, and Patricia saw something she'd been refusing to see for 3 years. Guilt. We were never really serious, Patricia. I thought you knew that. The letters, the plans, I was just being kind. But I don't actually know you like that. I didn't think you were actually building a life around this. Around us. He gestured vaguely between them, and that gesture destroyed her more than any words could. We had plans, Patricia whispered. We talked about the house, the wedding, your mother's land. I talk about a lot of things, Kwame said, and there was almost pity in his voice. It doesn't make them real. The rest of his words dissolved into static. Patricia stood there, her entire world cracking like dropped porcelain. 3 years. 3 years of letters, of hope, of believing that someone was waiting for her. 3 years of telling herself that this wasn't her real life, that she had something better waiting. And it was all a fantasy she'd built alone. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't break. She just turned and walked away, her spine straight, her face blank. But inside, something vital had shattered. Behind her, she heard Kwame say something to Yi Jun, probably thanking him for the opportunity. Probably asking about the job that had brought him here. Probably not thinking about the woman whose dreams he'd just crushed with 6 careless sentences. Patricia walked until she found an empty storage room, locked the door, slid down the wall, and then, finally, she let herself break. Here's where it gets twisted. Yi Jun didn't gloat, didn't celebrate his victory. In fact, when Dong found him later that evening, Yi Jun looked more troubled than triumphant. You got what you wanted, Dong said, lighting a cigarette. She's got nowhere to run now. I didn't want this. Then why did you do it? Yi Jun stared at his hands, at the rings that marked his status, at the scars that told stories of violence survived. I needed to know if he was real. And now that you know he wasn't, now I don't know if I made it better or worse. Dong laughed, a bitter sound. You destroyed her last piece of hope because you wanted her to see you instead. That's not complicated. That's just selfish. I know. Do you? Dong leaned forward. Because from where I'm standing, you just proved you're exactly what she should be afraid of. Yi Jun didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't fully understand it himself. What started as curiosity had mutated into something darker, something possessive. He told himself he just wanted to know the truth. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He wanted her to have nowhere to go except toward him. And now she did. But instead of coming to him, she disappeared inside herself. Patricia became a ghost. She worked, ate, slept, and spoke only when necessary. The light that had once flickered behind her eyes went out completely. She moved through the compound like she was already dead, her movements mechanical, her expression blank. The other staff noticed, whispered, speculated. Duck Huan tried to talk to her once. Are you all right? She looked at him with such emptiness that he actually stepped back. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Then maybe you should look somewhere else. She walked away, and Duck Huan didn't try again. Yi Jun tried to talk to her once. She was cleaning a hallway when he approached, his footsteps deliberately loud so he wouldn't startle her. She didn't turn around. Patricia. She kept scrubbing. I want to apologize. For what? Her voice was flat, emotionless. For showing me the truth? For proving that the one thing I thought was real was just another lie? Why would you apologize for that? Because I hurt you. No. She finally turned to face him, and her eyes were dead. You didn't hurt me. You just removed the bandage. The wound was already there. That's not. I hope it was worth it, she said quietly, and walked away. It wasn't. Yi Jun stood in that empty hallway for a long time after she left, staring at the place where she'd been, wondering when exactly he'd become the kind of man who destroyed things just to see if they'd still want him in the ruins. 2 months passed. The compound buzzed with new tensions. A rival faction, led by a vicious operator named Hak Kun, had been making moves on Yi Jun's territory. Shipments were being intercepted. Alliances were crumbling. People were dying in ways that sent messages. War was coming, and everyone knew it. Patricia barely noticed. She cleaned rooms while men planned violence. She served food while they discussed casualties like weather reports. She existed in a space between caring and not caring, where nothing felt real enough to matter. But Yi Jun noticed her. He started leaving things for her. Not gifts exactly. Just small considerations. Her favorite tea appeared in the kitchen. Her work schedule was lightened. When other staff were dismissed for minor infractions, she was left alone. When Duck Huan suggested moving her to a more secure part of the compound because of the increasing tensions, Yi Jun approved it immediately. She never acknowledged it, never thanked him, never even looked at him directly anymore. And somehow, that was worse than her anger had been. Then one night, everything changed. Patricia was carrying fresh towels to the west wing when she heard voices behind a partially closed door. She should have kept walking, should have minded her business. But she heard Yi Jun's voice, cold and final, and something made her stop. I don't make examples lightly, he was saying. But when someone betrays me, there's only one response. A pause. Then, do you have anything to say? A man's voice, pleading, begging, promising loyalty, promising information, promising anything. Yi Jun's response was simple. I don't believe you. A gunshot. Not loud. Muffled, controlled, the sound of a problem being solved efficiently. Then silence. Patricia's hands started shaking so badly she dropped the towels. They hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded like thunder in the quiet hallway. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart slamming against her ribs, her breath coming too fast. The door opened. Yi Jun stepped out, his expression calm, adjusting his cuffs like he'd just finished a business meeting. Blood speckled his collar. He saw her immediately. Their eyes met. She saw the truth of him then, the part he'd hidden when he was bleeding and vulnerable. This was who he really was. Not a victim. Not someone deserving of mercy. Not the man who'd asked not to die alone. A killer. Someone who ended lives with the same casualness other people showed changing clothes. Patricia, he said softly. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Her body had frozen, every muscle locked. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps measured, stopping just close enough that she could smell the gunpowder on his clothes. Are you afraid of me now? She wanted to lie. Wanted to say yes. Run. Never look at him again. Instead, she whispered, I've been afraid of you since the moment I met you. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Then why did you help me? Because fear and compassion aren't opposites. She bent down, picked up the fallen towels with trembling hands. And because you asked, she walked away, forcing her legs to move, forcing herself not to run. But this time, she felt his eyes following her long after she disappeared around the corner. And this time, she understood something she'd been refusing to accept. She wasn't afraid of what he was. She was afraid of what she was becoming by staying near him. You still with me? Comment below if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, because this story is about to go somewhere none of us expected. The attack came on a Friday. Hak Kuen's people hit 3 of Yi Jun's operations simultaneously, burning warehouses and killing anyone who fought back. It was strategic, brutal, and designed to send a message: your time is over. The compound went into lockdown. Armed guards patrolled every floor. Staff were confined to quarters. Phones were confiscated. No one in, no one out. And Yi Jun became something Patricia had never seen before: absolutely ruthless. He burned Hak Kuen's businesses in retaliation, cut off his supply lines, turned his allies into enemies with threats and bribes and carefully placed bodies. He moved through Seoul like a force of nature, destroying everything in his path until the entire city's underworld trembled. Patricia watched it happen from inside the compound. Watched men return with blood on their clothes. Watched the body count rise. Watched Yi Jun transform from someone who seemed almost human into something ancient and terrible. But in the middle of the chaos, she became his strange constant. He'd find her in the kitchen late at night, when everyone else was asleep or out conducting business, and they'd sit in silence. Not touching, not speaking, just existing in the same space, like 2 ghosts haunting the same house. You should leave, he told her once. Get out of Seoul before this gets worse. Where would I go? Anywhere. I tried anywhere. It brought me here. He looked at her with something that might have been regret. I should have let myself die that night. She turned to him, her expression hard. Don't you dare. Don't you dare use me as an excuse for the things you choose to do. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're sitting here, in the middle of a war you started, trying to play the tortured soul who wanted to be saved. But nobody forced you to investigate Kwame. Nobody forced you to bring him here and humiliate me. Nobody's forcing you to burn Seoul to the ground over territory and pride. You made choices. Own them. The words hung in the air like a knife. Yi Jun stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something crack in his carefully maintained armor. You're right. I know. But it doesn't change what I feel. I didn't ask you to feel anything. I know that too. They sat in silence for another hour, and neither of them mentioned that this was the longest conversation they'd ever had. Neither of them acknowledged that something was shifting between them, something dangerous and inevitable. When Patricia finally stood to leave, Yi-jun caught her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, just enough to make her pause. I can't undo what I did, he said quietly. But I can promise you this. As long as I'm alive, no one will hurt you. Patricia looked down at his hand on her wrist, at the scars that covered his knuckles, at the blood still trapped under his fingernails. The problem with that promise, she said softly, is that you're the one who hurt me most. She pulled free and walked away, but this time, she felt the weight of his promise following her like a shadow. But wait, what nobody knew, what Patricia wouldn't discover until it was too late, was that Hakuin had been watching the compound more carefully than anyone realized. He'd noticed the pattern, noticed how Yi-jun's attention kept drifting to one specific person, noticed the little protections, the small kindnesses, noticed how the most dangerous man in Seoul became something almost soft when a certain black woman entered the room. Hakuin wasn't interested in burning warehouses anymore. He wanted to cut out Yi-jun's heart, and now he knew exactly where to find it. They took her on a Wednesday, just before dawn. Patricia had been carrying supplies to the storage room when someone grabbed her from behind, pressing something against her nose and mouth. Chemical sweetness flooded her senses. Her vision blurred. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Then everything went dark. When she woke up, she was in a basement she didn't recognize, zip-tied to a chair. Her head pounded. Her mouth tasted like rust. The room smelled like old concrete and something metallic that might have been blood. Hakuin sat across from her, smoking a cigarette, looking almost bored. You're awake, he said in accented English. Good. I was worried they used too much. Patricia's throat was dry. Where am I? Somewhere your boyfriend will never find you in time. He leaned forward, studying her face like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. You know what's interesting? I've been trying to hurt Yi-jun for months. Burned his money, killed his people, destroyed his operations. Nothing worked. But you? You he'll actually bleed for. I'm nobody to him. Liar. Hakuin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're the woman who made him want to live. That makes you the most dangerous thing in his world. Patricia's mind raced. She wasn't trained for this. Wasn't prepared. She was just a maid who'd made the mistake of showing mercy to the wrong person at the wrong time. He won't come, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Oh, he'll come. And when he does, I'll kill him in front of you. Then I'll decide what to do with you. Hakuin stood, grinding his cigarette under his heel. Nothing personal. Just business. He left her alone in the darkness. Patricia closed her eyes and tried not to scream. Yi-jun found out she was missing within an hour. What happened next would become legend in Seoul's underworld, the kind of story people would whisper about for years, the kind of violence that redefined what it meant to be dangerous. He didn't just look for her. He tore through the city like a natural disaster. He burned Hakuin's remaining operations, tortured his associates for information, made it clear that anyone who'd helped take her would die slowly, publicly, and in ways that would serve as warnings for generations. Dukwon tried to reason with him. You're starting a war we can't finish. Then we'll die trying. Yi-jun's voice was cold, final, and human. Find her. We're looking. Look harder. It took 2 days. 2 days of blood and fire and broken alliances. 2 days of Yi-jun becoming something his enemies would have nightmares about. 2 days of Seoul's underworld learning that there were lines you didn't cross, and Patricia was the brightest one. When they finally located the building where Hakuin was holding her, Yi-jun didn't send his people in first. He didn't plan an elaborate rescue. He didn't wait for the perfect moment. He walked through the front door himself, alone, knowing it was a trap and not caring. The basement was a kill box. Hakuin's men were positioned at every angle, weapons trained on the stairs. They were ready for a war. But Yi-jun didn't come with guns blazing. He came with information. Your brother is alive, he called down into the darkness. The one you thought I killed 3 years ago? He's in Shanghai, running a restaurant. Has 2 kids now. I can prove it. Silence. I didn't kill him. Someone else did it, and they made sure you blamed me. Made sure you'd come after me. Made sure we'd destroy each other while they consolidated power. I have evidence. Names. Photos. Bank records. Everything. More silence. Then Hakuin's voice, tight with barely controlled rage. You're lying. I'm really not. And if you kill her, if you kill me, you'll never know the truth. You'll never know who actually took your brother from you. It was the most dangerous gamble of Yi-jun's life, a bluff built on a week of frantic investigation and one lucky break. He'd been digging into Hakuin's past, looking for leverage, looking for anything that might save Patricia. And he'd found something impossible. Evidence that the man Hakuin had been avenging for 3 years wasn't actually dead. He had no idea if Hakuin would believe him, but he had nothing else. 30 seconds passed. Then Hakuin appeared at the top of the stairs, gun in hand, fury written across every line of his face. "Show me." They made the exchange in the street. Patricia for the folder of evidence Yi Jun had compiled. Hakuin's men kept their weapons trained on both of them while he flipped through photos and documents, his expression shifting from rage to confusion to something like horror. Patricia stood between them, zip ties finally cut, her wrists raw and bleeding. She was shaking, from cold or fear or exhaustion. She couldn't tell anymore. Her legs barely held her weight. "This can't be," Hakuin's voice cracked. "It is." Yi Jun kept his voice neutral, even though every muscle in his body was screaming to grab Patricia and run. "I was framed. You were used. And we've been killing each other over a lie." Hakuin looked up, his eyes red with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. "Who did this?" "That's in the folder too." There was a long moment where the entire street held its breath, where the wrong word could have ended in a massacre. Then Hakuin lowered his gun. "We're done here." "We're done," Yi Jun agreed. Hakuin's people melted into the night. Yi Jun's men moved forward to secure the area. And Patricia just stood there, trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how she'd become valuable enough to stop a war. Then Yi Jun turned to her. He didn't touch her, didn't pull her close, didn't do any of the things she might have expected. He knelt, right there in the middle of the street, surrounded by his own people, surrounded by witnesses who would carry this story back to every corner of Seoul's underworld. He knelt in front of her like she was something sacred. "I should have let myself die that night," he said quietly. Patricia's hand moved before she could think. The slap echoed off the buildings. Yi Jun didn't flinch, didn't react, just stayed on his knees, accepting it, accepting her anger like it was something he'd earned. "You don't get to do that," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "You don't get to make me responsible for your choices. I saved your life because it was the right thing to do. What you did with it after that was on you. All the pain, all the violence, all of this, that's your burden, not mine. I know. You investigated me, humiliated me, used me as bait without telling me. I know. And now I was almost killed because you can't control your obsessions. I know." He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were hollow, haunted. "I know all of it, and I don't have an excuse. I only have the truth. I would burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone hurt you. I would start wars. I would break every alliance. I would destroy everything I've built. And I still don't know if that makes me a monster or just honest." Patricia wanted to scream at him, wanted to run, wanted to hit him again and again until her hand hurt as much as her heart. Instead, she collapsed. Her legs gave out, adrenaline finally crashing, and Yi Jun caught her before she hit the ground. He held her there, kneeling in the street, while she cried against his shoulder for the first time since Kwame had shattered her illusions. And for the first time since that night in his room, they just existed together. No games, no manipulation, no lies. Just two broken people holding on to each other because they had nothing else left. Duck Hwan turned away, giving them privacy. The other men did the same. And Seoul's underworld gained another story about Yi Jun, about the woman who could bring him to his knees, about the love that was dangerous enough to stop wars. The next week was strange. Hakuin's revelation created chaos in the underworld. The real enemy was exposed, alliances shifted, and Yi Jun consolidated power in ways that should have been impossible. Seoul's balance tipped in his favor. His territory expanded. His influence grew, but he barely seemed to notice. He kept Patricia close. Not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, not as anything that could be easily defined. Just close. He had her moved to a secure apartment in a different part of the city. Assigned her protection that rotated in 3 shifts. Made sure she had everything she needed, from clothes to books to a kitchen stocked with ingredients she'd mentioned liking once in passing. They didn't talk about what they were to each other. Didn't define it. Didn't dare name the thing that was growing between them like something inevitable and terrible, because naming it would make it real. And making it real would make it vulnerable. But they existed in each other's spaces. He'd show up at her apartment late at night, sometimes just to sit in her living room without speaking. She'd find herself at the compound more often than necessary, bringing him food when she knew he hadn't eaten. They were orbiting each other, pulled by a gravity neither could resist or acknowledge. "This won't end well," she told him one night. "I know. People like us don't get happy endings. I know that too. Then why are you still here? He looked at her with those dark eyes that had watched her from a bed where he was supposed to die. Because I'd rather have a tragic ending with you than a happy one without you. Patricia didn't know how to respond to that kind of honesty. So she did the only thing she could. She reached out and took his hand. They sat like that until sunrise, not speaking, not moving, just holding on. The attack that ended everything came exactly 3 weeks later. Yi Jun had been meeting with his inner circle, consolidating the new alliances, when the building exploded. Someone had planted charges in the foundation, timed perfectly to coincide with the meeting, designed to bring the entire structure down on top of Seoul's most powerful players. It was brilliant. It was brutal. It was effective. Patricia was in the apartment 6 blocks away when she heard it. The explosion was so loud it rattled her windows. She ran to look out and saw smoke rising into the sky like a dark pillar. She ran. By the time she reached the site, the building was an inferno. Emergency vehicles screamed toward the location. People ran in every direction. And through the smoke and chaos, she saw them dragging bodies out. She pushed through the crowd, desperate, frantic, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "Where is he?" she screamed at anyone who would listen. No one answered. Until she saw Duck Wan, his face covered in soot and blood, his arm hanging at a wrong angle. "Where is he?" she demanded, grabbing his good arm. Duck Wan's expression told her everything before his mouth could. No, tell me where he is. Patricia, tell me." Duck Wan pointed toward a section of rubble where emergency workers had stopped digging, where they'd covered something with a yellow tarp. Where Hope went to die? Patricia's world tilted. She walked toward it like she was moving through water, everything slow and wrong and impossible. Someone tried to stop her, a paramedic or police officer, but she pushed past them, her hands shaking as she reached for the edge of the tarp. "Miss, you can't." She pulled it back. Yi Jun lay there, his body torn and burned, barely recognizable. Blood covered everything. His chest was still. His eyes were closed. The man who'd refused to die alone in a room had died in fire and chaos, surrounded by enemies and ash. But as she knelt beside him, as her tears started falling, mixing with the blood and dirt on his face, his eyes opened one final time. Just a crack. Just enough to see her. His lips moved, forming a single word without sound, a word she read rather than heard. Live. Then nothing. His chest stopped moving. His eyes lost focus. And Yi Jun, the man who'd burned Seoul for her, who'd knelt in streets for her, who'd chosen her over everything, died in her arms. Patricia screamed. The sound came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she didn't know existed. It was the sound of every choice, every consequence, every moment of mercy and cruelty colliding into one unbearable truth. She'd saved him, and the world had killed him anyway. She held him while emergency workers tried to pull her away. Held him until her hands were covered in his blood. Held him until someone finally gave up and let her stay, kneeling in the ruins, cradling a dead man who'd given up his kingdom for a maid he'd met while dying. 6 months passed. Patricia left Seoul. She couldn't stay in the city that had taken everything from her, couldn't walk streets that reminded her of his face. She went back to Accra first, but even that felt wrong. The city where she'd dreamed of Kwame felt like another lifetime, another person's memories. Eventually, she settled in a small town in Ghana where nobody knew her story, where nobody asked questions about the nightmares that woke her screaming, where nobody noticed that she never wore anything red because it reminded her too much of blood. She worked at a clinic, helped people, saved lives in small ways that felt like penance for the one life she couldn't save. But every night, she dreamed of him, and every morning, she woke up wishing she'd never stopped at that doorway. The Korean underworld declared Yi Jun a legend. They held elaborate funerals, built monuments to his memory, whispered about him in tones usually reserved for myths. The man who'd stopped a war for love. The man who'd died protecting his empire. The man who'd loved so fiercely that it became his weakness and his strength. Duck Wan took over operations, maintaining the peace Yi Jun had died creating. He never contacted Patricia, never told her what happened to the empire, never explained that Yi Jun had left instructions in case of his death, instructions that included protection for her that would last as long as Duck Wan drew breath. And Patricia became a ghost story herself, the woman who'd saved a king and watched him fall, the woman who could bring monsters to their knees, the woman whose mercy had changed the fate of an entire city. Nobody knew where she went. Nobody dared ask. But here's the thing about legends. Sometimes they're built on truths we're too scared to question. In a private hospital in Busan, 600 kilometers from Seoul, a man lay in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped rhythmically. Bandages covered most of his body. His face was barely visible beneath the gauze. Third-degree burns covered 40% of his torso. 3 broken ribs. Punctured lung. Internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. But alive. Barely, impossibly, against all medical logic, alive. The doctors who treated him had been paid enough to forget he existed. The identity he'd used to check in was fake, built on layers of documentation that would dissolve the moment anyone looked too closely. The death certificate filed in Seoul was real enough to pass any inspection. And the only person who visited was Dong, who brought encrypted messages and updates on the world everyone thought this man had left behind. She's in Ghana, Dong said quietly, setting a tablet on the bedside table. Found a job at a clinic. Keeps to herself. Lives in a small house at the edge of town. No contact with anyone from Seoul. The man in the bed didn't respond. Couldn't yet. His throat had been too damaged, first by smoke inhalation, then by the breathing tube they'd had to insert. The doctors said he might never speak the same way again. But on the screen, a video played. Security footage from the clinic, showing Patricia walking across a courtyard, her face tired but peaceful in a way it never was in Seoul. She was wearing light colors, smiling at a child who'd run up to show her something. Living, like he'd told her to. The man watched the video loop 3 times, his eyes tracking her every movement. Then, with effort that made his entire body scream in protest, he reached for the tablet. His fingers, still bandaged, moved slowly across the screen, typing a single message. I told you to live. He sent it to nowhere, to an account that didn't exist, to the ghost of the man he used to be. Then he closed his eyes and let the machines breathe for him while he planned what came next. Because Patricia was living. But she wasn't free. And Yi Jun, the man who'd died for her, who'd let the world believe he was gone, who'd sacrificed everything including his own identity, wasn't done protecting her yet. Some stories don't end with death. Some stories just pause, waiting for the right moment to become something else entirely. So if you've made it this far, you know what I need you to do. Drop a comment right now. Just 2 words. Part 2. That's it. Type Part 2 if you need to know what happens next, if you need to see this story through to its real ending. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. And before you go, hit that subscribe button. Smash that like. Because True Soul Stories doesn't do simple. We do truth. We do darkness. We do the stories that other channels are too afraid to touch. Now get down there and type Part 2, because Patricia's story isn't over. Yi Jun's resurrection is coming. And when she finds out the truth, when she discovers what he sacrificed, when she realizes that the man she mourned is watching her from the shadows, everything will burn again. Part 2 in the comments. Do it now.